I am very pleased to bring Joe Morris here to speak. Joe and I go back many decades, and as most of you know, I came here from Chicago, and I worked with Joe very early on when he ran for the president of the Cook County Board. Cook County is the county that Chicago is in, and he ran as a Republican for the, okay, a little better? Okay. Which of course was a kamikaze campaign, which was fine, and we did actually pretty well. We got the message out. So Joe has been an active conservative for all these years. He is currently president, or chairman, I should say, to get the right title, chairman of the Heartland Institute. I've been on the Heartland Institute board for over 20 years. I'm actually a long service member of the Heartland board. Heartland has been a leading advocate for the freedom movement in America, for free speech, for free trade, for school choice, and probably the most prominent voice in the world for climate realism. Okay? Heartland holds regular conferences about climate. Okay? I would love to have any of you here who are very interested come to those conferences. Okay? I'll be glad to get the word out. We bring wonderful speakers that, according to the mainstream press, don't exist. Because, of course, nobody actually is a realist, they claim, but there are many, many who are. And we've been spreading the word throughout Europe now. We have an affiliate chapter in London, and we're talking about potentially spreading that farther east in Europe. Okay? Joe's also the president of the Philadelphia Society. So he's got a very distinguished background. I go back many, many years. I've heard Joe speak many times. He's a wonderful speaker. He's a constitutional lawyer. He had a law firm with offices in Chicago and London called Morris, Rathnow, and Della Rosa. So if you guys have any business in London or in Chicago, feel free to contact Joe or see him after this. But with no further ado, I want him to have as much time speaking as possible, so I'm going to turn this over. I am so pleased to have Joe Morris.
Thank you, Paul. That was very generous. Chairman Ingram, other ladies of the organizing committee, including Beth Maggioroni, Amy Michaelison, all of you, thank you for your warm welcome and your invitation here to Savannah. I apologize from the beginning for two things. One is the weakness of my voice. I had a severe upper respiratory infection about 3 weeks ago, started about a month ago, and I've been over it for a couple of weeks, but I haven't been able to shake the cough. It's a persistent, annoying cough, and thank you for putting up with my unnatural voice. My second apology is I came to Savannah with my own lady of the right, Kathy Morris, who is very much looking forward to being here with you today, and unfortunately she had the same condition, followed me by about a week, and this morning she's just fatigued, wiped out after a very busy day yesterday in Savannah, thanks to some of you, so I apologize that Kathy Morris is not here. I want to thank our chairman for that splendid lead-in to today's discussion, her discussion of the history, not just of revolutionary impulses in this part of America, but how the American people came to be formed. If you think about it, it was a remarkable thing from north to south, these highly independent colonies with very different histories and very different local governance structures, nonetheless managed to see themselves as something new, an American people clearly connected with the mother country in the sense most important of inheriting the common law and the sense of the, quote, rights of Englishmen. But as they observed from time to time, especially the last 50 years, in the run-up to the start of the Revolution, they observed that the people in England were not respectful of the local rights of these Englishmen in North America. And that must be because they didn't see that we had those rights, that we were pawns or peons or colonials, and not people with the full range of political and other liberties that we saw ourselves having as a matter of right and not of inheritance, not only from English tradition and common law, but also, as Mr. Jefferson put it, nature's God, of inheritance from nature's God. So by the time the Revolution happened, there was this idea that had formed that we were an American people. And so although we were in 13 independent states by the time we declared our independence, each with its own constitution, each with its own sovereignty, there was a sense from the beginning that we belonged together. By the way, one of the most remarkable things about that sense of national identity is that the Constitution of 1787, which will celebrate the 250th anniversary, I hope we all celebrate, 11 years from now, contained within it the seeds of the growth of the Republic. There's an article in the original text of the Constitution that provides for the admission of new states to the Union. And as those new states are admitted to the Union, they're admitted to the Union with the same political rights as the existing 13 colonies, the original 13 states. That is, full representation in the Senate, 2 votes per state, and full representation based on population in the House of Representatives, and a vote for the Electoral College to elect the president. So that the founders understood that as the nation expanded, this would result in the political dilution of the existing states as new states were admitted. But among things to be gained from that was the fact that the people who lived in the new states would be full citizens and full participants in the life of the Republic. Think of the energy and the advantages to be gained from that. And they would not be mere colonists. No more of this dependence on people far away. They would have skin in the game. That was an amazing insight on the part of the founding generation, unprecedented in human history. There was so much that was unprecedented in human history in that founding. I think building off of Diane's opening remarks, let me observe what an extraordinary debt we owe to the generation of those founders. Think of those names: Washington, Franklin, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Rush. I mean, just absolutely remarkable people on this side of the Atlantic, and their friends on the other side of the Atlantic: Edmund Burke and Samuel Johnson and the Scottish Enlightenment people, Adam Smith and David Hume. They all knew of each other in the same way that Diane was describing how people knew of George Whitley. And they were in communication with it. They were reading each other's books, reading each other's pamphlets. And there was a community of ideas of liberty that were circulating. And with all due respect to many other figures in the story of the American founding, I respectfully submit that the single most important one of them was the obvious one, and that was George Washington. And I want to take just a short detour which will tie to one of my 2 major themes for today. And that detour begins with my granddaughter. When she was about 6 or 7 years old, she came home from school one day, and I said, "What are you studying?" And she said, "American history. We're studying George Washington." I said, "What do you know about George Washington?" And the very first thing she said was, "He had slaves." I mean, that's like saying Leonard Bernstein had sandals, or Jonas Salk drove a VW. I mean, that missing the point entirely. Think of what the world would have been like without George Washington. Here was a man of known personal integrity who saw the country through the war, saw the country through the interregnum, the interval between the Peace of Paris, the treaty between the United States and Britain, up to the Constitutional Convention, presided over the Constitutional Convention, put down a rebellion at Newburgh before we got to the Constitution, personally going to Newburgh, New York, to confront soldiers who were angry because the Congress in Philadelphia was not paying their salaries and threatening to overthrow the Republic. Here comes their hero, their leader, saying, are you prepared to betray everything you've just fought for money? Be patient with your fellow Americans. We have all pledged to each other, as the Declaration says, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And of course, part of the genius of the constitutional settlement was that the federal government took responsibility then for the debts of the states who were paying the state militias of the Revolutionary War that comprised the Continental Army. Washington, so much more. The single most important thing that George Washington did for this country was when his terms of office as president was up, he went home. He went home. He said, I've done my duty. You're a free people. Elect somebody else to replace me. I'm not indispensable. The republic goes on. You don't need one individual to be your master. He went home. He went back to his plow, farmed for several more years, continued to contribute to public life. Think how many revolutions, think Napoleon, think any number of revolutions in Africa or South America, or the Middle East. Is the great revolutionary leader unwilling to give up power? I'm indispensable. I must possess power for life. From the beginning, the political culture of the United States, and it's no accident to who we are and who we have become, has been premised on the idea that our leaders surrender power. And when George III, the king who lost the war, received reports from his diplomats that it was rumored that George Washington was going to refuse the monarchy, to be king of America, was going to serve in his elective office and then retire, George III laughed. And he said, if he does that, he is the greatest man in the world. I'm quoting George III. If he does that, he's the greatest man in the world. Well, he did, and he was. Now, something else that Washington did that ties directly into Diane's remarks about the importance of faith communities in this country and how at the time of the Revolution there were several colonies, soon to be independent states, that had established churches within them. Mr. Washington was an advocate, as were so many of the other founders, of religious liberty. Remember that built into the original copy, the original text of the Constitution, before the adoption of the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, there was a provision in the original Constitution that said in order to hold public office in the United States, there shall be no test of religion, no religious test. Now, Mr. Washington lived that out in his terms as president, the first president of a new country. He took tours. Not an easy thing to do. He made a point of going to all of the original 13 states. He took a tour to the north, he took a tour to the south, he came to Georgia, he went to as far north as New Hampshire and Rhode Island. And this is not an era of interstates or aviation. He didn't go back to Washington every night, or Philadelphia, the capital of those days, or New York, the capital of those days. He did not go to a Holiday Inn. He had to make unusual arrangements and make his progress patiently through the roads as best he could, which meant that he was on the road for many weekends during these tours, showing himself to the people of Delaware and Pennsylvania and Maryland and New York, showing their president and meeting with local officials, state officials, mayors, county officers, judges, and so forth, showing the solidarity of the American people and showing the face of their president. And he'd be in town over the weekend. George Washington was what we would call today an Episcopalian. He was a child of what had been the Church of England. So if there was an Episcopal church in town on the weekend, he was visiting somewhere, he'd go to the Episcopal church. If there was no Episcopal church, he'd go to the Methodist church. Or he'd go to the Lutheran church. Or he'd go to the Baptist church. Or he'd go to the Catholic church. Now think of that message. Here's the chief magistrate of the American people making no distinction among citizens. You have religious liberty. And I am showing you that I respect your religious liberty. We have something in common. That's valuable. We have our different traditions. We have our different faiths. We're not dictating that. We're respecting each other and moving on, preserving the beliefs and faiths we have, the institutions and the heritage that we have, but respecting it. Not trying to use the power of the state to coerce anything about people. And this came to a brilliant head when he hits the town of Newport in Rhode Island. He's there on a Saturday and finds out that there is a synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. It was founded by Spanish immigrants who had come by way of the Caribbean, the Truro Synagogue. He worshipped at the Truro Synagogue. Now imagine the message, if the Roman Catholic King of Spain, or in those days the Anglican King of Britain, or a Lutheran King of Sweden had gone to a synagogue or somebody else's church at all. What an uproar that would be, how unacceptable that would be. But Washington made certain that respect for each other was built into our DNA from the beginning because he led it. He showed it. And there's a brilliant correspondence between Washington and the people of that synagogue. They wrote him a letter of thanks for coming to visit. And he wrote back a lovely letter, which is the most remarkable the most remarkable explication of the importance of religious liberty in America you'll ever see. Google Washington's letter to the Truro Synagogue. It's T-O-U-R-O, the Newport Synagogue. It's a brilliant letter by George Washington. So, to come to my two main themes, and I don't think they're themes with which you will disagree. The first theme is that the institutions of the American system, the principles of America as laid out in our Declaration of Independence 250 years ago this year, and then is energized and institutionalized in our Constitution written in 1787 and adopted and in place by 1789, are simply the most remarkable, the highest level of achievement, of political achievement of humanity. I mean, I make that grand statement. Humanity has never achieved a set of political arrangements superior to those of the Constitution of the United States and the American establishment, the American founding, the American experiment. And we should be proud of it. We should understand it. We should study it. And my second main theme is the single greatest threat to the survival of our republic is domestic, and it is loss of faith and belief and knowledge of our system and the reasons for it. And this is something we can cure. We can cure it beginning at our own dinner tables with our children or our grandchildren and so forth. We can cure it in you can cure it in doing what you do every month here in this organization. I announced those two themes knowing that there's no dissent here. We've learned from Diane's opening address today that you're not only patriots, but you're informed patriots, so you're way ahead of the game. What I have in this box is the Constitution of the United States. Don't leave home without it. I have 200 copies, pocket copies, of the Constitution with also the Declaration of Independence. So the two founding documents, 200 copies, they're yours. Take them. Take as many as you want. Give them to your kids. Give them to your grandkids. Read them yourselves. reading the Declaration of Independence is always an eye-opener. You know, it is we forget sometimes, it's a bill of indictment against the king and the British government with dozens of paragraphs of things that the British are doing that are unacceptable to us. And how many of these resonate with us, overtaxing us, failing to defend us against predators, sending swarms of public officials to eat our substance. You know, those are not just problems of the 1770s, those are problems of today, with a government that is overweening and doesn't respect the central core proposition of the American founding, which is that we are a self-governing people, and we expect our government to be limited. This is a problem that conservatives have everywhere, and at all times. We don't think that government is the most important thing in life. If you're a person of the left, nothing is more important than government. Nothing is more important than politics. If you're a person of the right, what's more important than government and politics? Almost everything. Faith, family, business, education, self-improvement, art, culture, they're all more important than government. All we want government to do is make peace and make us free to pursue the things that really matter to us. So we're always fighting with one hand behind our back when we go into politics, aren't we? Because for us, politics and government are merely a shield behind which we can do the stuff that's really important. Our lives, our families, our businesses, our educations, our culture. Whereas for people of the left, nothing's more important than politics and government. They put their best people into politics and government. You can see the results. So we're always fighting with one hand tied behind our back, aren't we? But that's the price we pay because we're free people, and we understand that politics is not the center of life. That government is meant to be limited so we can do these other things. So how do we combat that? We combat that with education. We combat that with a clear understanding of how we came to be and what the sources of our current problems may be. And I don't have time, of course, to do a universal encyclopedic treatment of these things, but let me begin with just a few core observations. Basically three. One is the American experiment comes not in a vacuum. It comes as a result of the growth of 2,000 years or so of Western civilization. We are an outgrowth of Western civilization. What is Western civilization? When did it begin? It began at that moment when Jerusalem met Athens, when the Judeo-Christian tradition met the philosophers of reason from Greece, when people like, within the Judeo-Christian tradition, Maimonides and Augustine, and later people like Thomas Aquinas, were seeing how faith and reason are compatible, and how when you merge faith and reason, important things follow. And is that not the case we do not reject reason. We do not worship, we respect science, we pursue science. This is a constant battle we have at the Heartland Institute with the left, because we know that science is never settled, that no debate in science is ever closed. Galileo proved that, didn't he? How many times do we have to relearn these lessons? The scientific method is a very simple one. It is, can you replicate results of an experiment more than once in the open with your data transparent? And if you can, then you've established a pretty good theory. But if somebody can come along and show data that contradicts the theory, tries the same experiment and gets a different result, then there's a debate. Science is debate. Real science is debate. It's a horrible thing when the so-called experts, whether it's in climate change or it's in the so-called science of COVID and pandemics, refuse open freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is dangerous, they tell us. It leads people to make bad decisions. Well, I'm sorry, that's the point of freedom. If we're a free people, we're open to debate. We want to see the facts. We want to see the data. We want to make our own decisions. We don't want to have quote-unquote experts telling us what our decisions should be. So in this heart of Western tradition's political sensibility, I respect our two passages from the Bible. One is from the Hebrew Scriptures in the book of Genesis, where we are told every person is made in the image and likeness of God. Every person is made in the image and likeness of God. Now, if you believe that, wow, that's an amazing, both liberating and shocking observation, that every one of us has a divine connection. Every one of us has embedded within us something that is divine, and we have some connection to our Creator. But the other passage comes from the New Testament, from the Gospels, where Jesus is being picked at by people who are showing him Roman coin and saying, whose coin is this? And Jesus' response is, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God's. Now, that was a shocking statement at the time. First of all, because some people didn't know that everything wasn't Caesar's. But how could you tell that this coin is Caesar's? It's got his face on it. Well, how can you tell what belongs to God? Well, Jesus was a pretty smart rabbi. He knew his Old Testament very well. He knew that we are told in Genesis, every person is made in the image and likeness of God. You want to see somebody who's got God's face on it? Look around. Look around. Look around. There's God's face everywhere you look in this room. Go look in the mirror if you want to see God's face. That is to say, we belong to God. We don't belong to Caesar. We belong to God. We have freedom. We have dignity as children of God. That notion that each of us is made in the image and likeness of God is both revolutionary and liberating, isn't it? And it means that what we've done in the American founding is we've made a pact among children of God to live together and create institutions that allow us to live out that life. The life that we inherit as children of God, by our own lights, without coercion, under limited government. That's the brilliance of this legacy we have from Western civilization. Now that's point one. Study our history. Study the history of Western civilization. It brings us down through the Middle Ages and our British inheritance, which was brilliant, parliamentary government, the common law, the rights of Englishmen. Pardon me. And we're not about to let someone strip them away from us. We're going to enforce them. The second theme in terms of this historical overview is the role of other concepts in fleshing out the content of the Constitution and the Declaration. I told you that the back end of the Declaration is an indictment, specific indictment, paragraphs of indictment about the misconduct of king and parliament. The front end is a brilliant statement of enduring political principle that is the distillation of this history of Western civilization. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these ends, just governments are established among men by the consent of the governed, that whenever governments become obstructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish them. Message there. That's, by the way, one sentence. Some people have called it the greatest sentence in English ever written. Think of what's embedded in those notions. Our rights are not given to us by government. As a matter of fact, governments are created by us to serve our interests, not the other way around. A core concept, right? We are expected to think for ourselves and pursue our life, our liberty, and happiness. Happiness is something we have to define for ourselves. It can't be prescribed for us. There's no cookie-cutter human happiness. This is following close on the second treatise of government by John Locke, who talks about life, liberty, and property. Property is an important part of happiness, pursuing happiness, isn't it? Because it is through our owning property that we are able to impose our natures on the external world. This is how we put a human imprint on the world around us, by owning land, by owning things, and by doing constructive things by our own lights with them. So embedded in this are notions of private property, free enterprise, free markets. This is part of our inheritance is the work of Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, the notion that we don't get our dinner because of the benevolence of the baker or the brewer, but because they're looking after their self-interest. And in a free and peaceful society, when people look after their own self-interests, what follows is cooperation. We're all better off by cooperating with each other. The left wants to argue that any given transaction is a zero-sum game. That at best, when there is a trade, people come out even. Usually somebody loses. No, the great insight of Adam Smith and the American founders was that trade, free markets, increase value. You have a pound of barley. I have a pound of coffee. You don't need your pound of barley. I don't need my pound of coffee. I'd rather have a pound of barley. You'd rather have a pound of coffee. We switch. Something that is of less value to me is of greater value to you. Something that is of less value to you is of greater value to me. We make that trade and we both win. The economists will tell us that we have just increased the value of wealth in the community because you value what you now have more than you did before, and I value what I have now more than I did before. And that's the magic of free markets, because we value things differently, and we can trade freely to improve our own situations. Thus do we pursue liberty. Thus do we pursue happiness. So the third area that I want to talk about is how we got off the rails. And we are off the rails, or at least in danger of getting off the rails. And I respectfully submit that the worst of our blight began in the early 20th century in the eras of Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Roosevelt. Woodrow Wilson was sort of the first presidential progressive. There's an argument made that Theodore Roosevelt was too, but Roosevelt was bumptious rather than thoughtful about it. Woodrow Wilson was an open enemy of the Constitution. He thought that the Constitution imposed unreasonable restraints on the exercise of power by government, and he would have done away with many of those restraints. And he believed in government by experts who would tell us how best to live our lives rather than let us make our own choices. And that strongly influenced a line of presidents from Franklin Roosevelt to Lyndon Johnson to Barack Obama. Barack Obama, also a president who disapproved of our Constitution. I'm embarrassed to say he taught law at my law school, the University of Chicago, and he was outspoken about how our Constitution was backwards. It was a Constitution of negative rights, rights you can't take away. He wanted to see a Constitution of rights that the government gives you, completely antithetical to the American spirit. In the Roosevelt administration, we began a process of congressional acquiescence in executive power. That is to say, Congress became comfortable with letting the executive take the initiative in making decisions and taking actions with ever less and less oversight, with less and less decisions made by legislation and more by executive action. And that's accelerated over the course of the last half century, well, 75 years and more. And let me explain why that happens, because here's a path to a remedy. That happens because Now, I'm not condemning your congressman or my congressman when I say this, but most congressmen have as their priority the simple business of being reelected to office, right? And what's the best way for an incumbent congressman to win re-election to office? And that's to do nothing controversial, do nothing that makes anybody angry. So how do you do that? Well, you've got a big public problem. People are upset about something, whether it's energy or it's transportation safety or it's food prices. So what you do is you create an agency, put it under the executive, and give it responsibility to fix the problem. And to make it clear to the people that this is what you've done, you give the agency the name of the problem, the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Highway Transportation Safety Board. Now, people can say, what are you doing to make our roads safe? Well, I've created an agency that has that job. Now, they delegate to the agency the authority to make rules, to carry out that mission. And if you don't like the rules, you can sue in the federal courts to have those rules examined by the courts. And so, and what does this mean? Somebody complains about the job that the federal government's doing, say trying to make transportation on the highway safer. Don't blame me, says the congressman. Blame the stupid executive branch. They're making the wrong rules. Or don't blame me, blame the courts who are interpreting the rules the wrong way, right? And notice what happens. Between the time of the passage of the Act of Congress and the enactment of the regulations by the executive, let alone the conclusion of the litigation in the courts, 1, 2, 3, 10 election cycles have passed. And people forget, who cast the vote for this. And eventually there's enough pressure, maybe they'll change the rules. This is unacceptable in the American system. Congress needs to take responsibility for setting the rules. The Supreme Court is currently wrestling with what it calls the major questions doctrine, where it's seriously talking about reining in the ability of the executive agencies to make rules in the absence of express congressional authority and very clear standards imposed by Congress on how to do that. But don't leave that work for the Supreme Court alone. Challenge your own congressman when the opportunity arises to pull back on the delegations of authority of the executive branch. Even as an executive branch we may have voted for, it's not the way the system works, and it doesn't work well. And remember, there will come a day when the master class that Mr. Trump has been giving in how to push executive power to the maximum will now devolve on a president of another party who use those same tools but in a completely different direction. It's not the policy directions that are the problem here, it is the tools. The tools are antithetical to the American system. We don't want those decisions being made by the executive or the judiciary. The system is designed to have those rules made, those decisions made by elected officials accountable to the people. So, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, ladies to the right and your friends, recur to the fundamentals. Master your knowledge of the Constitution and the principles of the Declaration. Teach them, inculcate them in your children and your grandchildren. Study our history. Study the history of the Western civilization that preceded it. Study the history of the founding of this republic. And study current events through these lenses. And then I think we can answer Mr. Franklin's question today. We've kept